Hi everyone, Joan Seitkin here, and welcome to the Prosperity Show, where we explore the inner path to business and financial success, personal fulfillment, and peace of mind. I apologize for not having an episode last week, but I was a little rattled by software glitches. Working in the cloud sometimes gets in trouble if you've got a complicated setup. And my peace of mind was slightly askew, and I didn't get to do an episode. So here we are. And I'm really excited about bringing this one to you because I really had a good time interviewing Audrey Holst. You'll hear all about her when we start the interview. And so now let's get to the interview. My guest today is Audrey Holst, who guides ambitious high performers and high achievers who are ready to stop micromanaging their lives with perfectionism so they can actually start living. She's the founder of the Fortitude and Flow process, which uses mindful and embodied practices to create transformation. Her work goes beyond mindset and addresses perfectionism's impossible standards at their root cause. Audrey, welcome to the Prosperity Show.
Thanks so much for having me, Joan. I'm so psyched for this conversation.
Me too. Audrey and I met a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, and someone introduced us, and it was a sister from another space. It was just wonderful.
Immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is that it's so cross-generational. You know, that I'm so happy that I have this podcast, which allows me to cross the generational divide. So keeps me young. That's what's important. Okay, so I doubt that you got into dealing with perfectionism without having had to deal with that within yourself. So can you share with us how the little backstory on this?
Sure. Yeah. So you're correct. I've dealt with my own flavors of perfectionism. And I think this is going to be an important story for people to hear because I think that there is a generalized concept of what perfectionism is. And there's actually many different ways that perfectionism can show up. So if I'm starting at the very beginning, I was somebody who was always naturally fairly proficient at things in general. I didn't have to put a lot of effort into school. I sort of skated through in terms of my grades. I did a lot of last minute writing of papers. I was always waiting to the last minute to do things, which is actually one of those things that does follow perfectionists. That is a fairly common trait of perfectionists where they have a bit of a anxiety about getting something done and not doing it right. So they put it off to the last minute. And then often the product that's produced is maybe not as high of a quality, but then they can blame it on, oh, well, I didn't have the time or that sort of thing, as opposed to their own anxiety about the thing. So that is definitely something that I can relate to. I was one of those people. I was sort of an awkward kid. I was, brainy and sensitive and sort of strange. And I was bullied in middle school, which is just such a brutal time period for kids in general. I've talked to many other people who have had similar experiences. And that really, I think, amplified my perfectionism in a way with relationships, especially where I felt like I had to really assimilate and be a certain way in order to stay part of the pack, to stay part of the village. So my perfectionism shifted in a way where I was really trying to do the social things perfectly because I had felt the pain of what it was to not do that well. So in terms of how I was appearing and how I was doing things and trying that, and then I flipped that also. If I wasn't so good at that, I'd flip that and say, you know what? Screw everybody. I'm going to rebel. I'm going to be the perfect rebellious. I'm going to perfectly rebel against all of these things, which is also that avoidance is another perfectionism thing too. It's interesting how it all comes together. So when I went off to school. I went off to school for something that I was really passionate about at the time, which was equine business management and riding. So I have a business degree, but it's in equine in horses, which is very niche, very targeted. And I tried, my dad convinced me that the right move out of school was to go get a traditional job. So I did that. I did the perfect thing, which is okay, get the traditional job with the 401k and the benefits and the salary and all that sort of stuff. And I was miserable, really miserable. And I ended up quitting that job and going off to Hawaii, and which was kind of the perfect rebellion at that point. All right, I'm going to quit this job, screw this corporation, and I'm going to go become a yoga instructor, because that's where I'm going to find my bliss. And I followed that for about 16 years. So, and did the same thing with that culture where I'm going to get this right. I was in a very rigid form of yoga. So there was very particular words you said, there was very particular order that you did them in. So I kept finding myself in places where things had to be done a certain way, which when I finally hit this entrepreneurial road that I'm on now, that just blew up everything. Because if anybody who's listening is an entrepreneur and can relate with perfectionism, it is an awful combination. So the entrepreneurial path, which I've been on, I'd say for the last 6 years or so, has really been an untangling and unfolding of a lot of those habits and embodied ways of being that I had been moving through the world in.
So what do you think was behind your perfectionism? I always am interested in the emotional causes of behavior. And so I wonder whether, I assume you've looked into that. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think I reflect on these things. I don't really dig that deep into it, because I found ways in the present to address them, where it's not like I have to go digging in the past and sort of unearth and do that sort of thing. But I would say that I had a mother who was very perfectionist, was very rigid about her standards, did things a very particular way. She was the sort of person that never left the house without her makeup and her nails done. You know, the house was immaculate. She grew up in a household that was the opposite of that. So I think when she got to have her control, it was a very particular way. So I think that a lot of my perfectionism standards come from that.
Okay, so it was learned behavior, but you also learned your mother's emotions that were behind that behavior. Because when she was pregnant with you, you got it. You got the neuropeptides that attached to. So you were bound to go into perfectionism. It was like you couldn't avoid it. And so what was that aha moment, if there was one, where you said to yourself, "This isn't working for me"?
I think a lot of it. So there's a couple of different aha moments that I can think of along my journey, and I think that one of what you just mentioned, understanding that concept, and just even understanding what I would phrase as the concept of epigenetics, right? That inherited. When I learned about that concept, that kind of blew my mind, because I think it's common for us to think about ourselves in a vacuum and just think, this is all mine, some version of that, you know, like everything that I'm experiencing is all my fault in some way, shape, or form. And I'm 100% responsible for all of these things. And I've done this to myself. There's these sort of narratives that go on. So I think just this concept of, oh, I am related to the people that I'm related to, and it is learned, and it is physical, and it is genetic. I think that knowledge took a little bit of weight off my shoulders to understand and have that concept of, oh, okay, this is bigger than just me and me having issues, you know, some version of that. I think that also understanding that our bodies are so wise and that I experience life at a very physical level. So when I talk about this experience that I had in this interpersonal meditation practice where people were talking about body sensations. And I know this is something that you talk about also, and I don't think is actually common. I think it's becoming more common. I think these terms, these conversations are coming up more and more, which is awesome. But I was not familiar with just the concept of a body sensation being a body sensation. I was really good at labeling it and then making meaning out of it. And in these meditations, we were taught to basically just label these sensations and speak it to another person, and that being the end of the sentence. I feel tightness in my chest, I feel a constriction in my belly, and that was the end of the sentence. And for me, that was mind blowing because it was so straightforward and it wasn't a problem. So I think a lot of when I started to really dig into a lot of these sensations that came along with my perfectionism and stopped making meaning out of them and started to just be present with the sensations, that made a huge difference for me as well.
Okay, so you're saying that by paying attention to your body sensations, that you were enhancing your self-awareness.
Yes, I would say enhancing and also redefining.
Okay, but and what I'm seeing is that the whole emotional intelligence thing, one of the most important things about understanding emotions is your self-awareness.
Yes.
So this was, and that came from the yoga, I'm assuming. I mean, when you're doing the corpse pose, you have to be aware of your body and its position. And, so even though you went beyond the yoga, I taught yoga at one point at the LA Athletic Club in the 1960s. And when you're doing yoga, you have to be body aware because you're aware of the position of your body and how it feels and what's too far. And I don't know that people associate that with emotions and behaviors, but it really does make a difference.
I think so. And I think that the yoga that I practiced was sort of a double-edged sword with that, because so I taught and I practiced this Bikram style or hot style of yoga. And the culture around that particular type of yoga is a bit different than some other types of yoga in that it's a very mind over matter. Don't be afraid to push yourself, go to your limits. There's a lot of languaging and pride around being able to push yourself in this practice. So I think that it gave me an intro to these concepts, but until I was actually able to untangle a bit of the, okay, I'm actually going to feel this and actually honor it, as opposed to feel this and push through it, or feel this and push past it, or feel this and ignore this. And I saw that a lot in students where they would notice something, but then they wouldn't necessarily honor it in a way that was beneficial. So I think that it was a little bit of a double-edged sword. And I think I had a bit of deconditioning to get through as I started to dig into the origins of that practice and the philosophies behind it.
So in doing your work with other people, do you focus on what the emotions are behind their perfectionism?
I would say emotions, and I would say that the physicality, that felt sensation, and a lot of just noticing and awareness. A lot of it is awareness. I just call it noticing. A lot of noticing, because we are so conditioned to go straight to interpretation. It's like noticing and interpretation are so close together that we have no idea that they're different things. So we'll notice something and instantly interpret it or instantly make meaning out of it before we actually are able to take a pause and say, oh, I noticed something, and then pause right there. It doesn't need to mean anything. It doesn't need to be interpreted. It doesn't need to be taken action on. So just putting that pause in between noticing something and then whatever comes next is a huge, huge piece of the work I do.
So can you give us an example of what I might notice if you were helping me through whatever perfectionism I might have left?
Right. So whatever scraps that may still be in the archives. Yeah. So a lot of it is discomfort when I start to feel uncomfortable in what I do. So, I may have a client say, or have a habit around, okay, I was having a conflict with my employer, and I noticed that or employer, or whatever, maybe work relationships come up a lot, because obviously that's a big part of people's worlds. And they will jump in to fix the problem, or fawn. That's a big thing with some perfectionists, right? They want to fawn, they want to make sure everything is right, they want to fix the problem. And so instead of, okay, you're in a conversation, you're having a conflict, you notice the discomfort, and you think, and you're feeling, I'm so uncomfortable right now. So as opposed to, okay, I feel uncomfortable, the way I'm going to navigate this discomfort is to go fix and manage something here. I got to fix it. I got to fix this relationship. I got to make this person feel better. I have to do, act. You can simply start with that. I feel really uncomfortable right now. I notice how uncomfortable I am right now. I notice this tension in my chest. I notice that I'm starting to hold my breath. I notice that I'm starting to make some meaning out of this. And literally just taking that pause in that moment to take a few breaths, to maybe soften around my shoulders, to soften around my chest, and just get very present with that discomfort, as opposed to jumping into action. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because in the system that I use is, what are you feeling?
Yes.
And what are you feeling in your body? What are you feeling?
Yes.
It's not in your head, it's also in your
Yes.
body. And then I take it to, and when did you feel it before? So that people can recognize that it's a habit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when you were discussing, where people tend to go when they notice the discomfort, where they want to fix things and do things differently, that's no different from someone doing an addictive behavior, like smoking or drinking or whatever it is that people do to distract from that discomfort. So
Yes.
that it seems to me that when you're describing perfectionism, it's to make the feeling of discomfort go away, but the process that you're using is just as destructive as smoking a cigarette or taking a drink.
Yes, and I often will say that something like perfectionism is a coping mechanism, or even perfectionism is a survival mechanism, right? Depending on how people were brought up, perfectionism may have been their way to survive when they didn't have autonomy when they were younger. So they might just continuously be repeating these habits over and over again, not having the conscious knowledge of, okay, I am not whatever age I was when these things started to become part of my embodied process in the world. And so now we have the tools, we have the autonomy, we have the ability to start to interrupt those cycles, exactly like you said. Absolutely.
And it's amazing how deep it goes. Recently, I was getting ready for this event that I've been talking about, and I realized that I was avoiding putting together the landing page where people could see the information. Mm-hmm. And the event is doing something that I haven't done in a while, because it embarrasses me sometimes when I do it because of the sounds I make and that sort of thing. But I knew I had to do it because I knew the effect it has on people. And so I asked myself, why am I so afraid? And I started thinking of the Joan of Arc story, which I once related to when I was on my cockamamie journey, and realized that I had part of that inside of me, not that I was Joan of Arc. And I realized, and being Jewish, and realizing that I'm afraid if I really put myself out there, that I'm going to get killed. Yes. And so that was such an ancient story. And so I was avoiding putting it out there, because what if I put it out there and no one wants to sign up? And what if I haven't got the copyright? So I created a landing page, which I've done dozens of times for easier topics. And then someone who I've become friendly with she looked at the copy and helped me punch it up a bit, you know. So, and then I went over it and softened it a bit. So once you make the decision to change it, then you'll get the help you need, it seems to me.
Yes. And it really is. I love that example. And it's that language around I'm going to be killed. That is so the language people will use when they do something for the first time that their perfectionism has stopped them from doing, and they get to the other side of it. Very so commonly, what they'll say is something like, I did X, Y, and Z and I didn't die. Like that's the feel, right? Like that's literally the embodied feeling that they have that, oh my gosh, if I do this thing, I'm going to die, right? That is the nervous system's hardwired response to these things is somehow I'm going to die if I do this thing. So when they do it and they reflect on it and they integrate it, it is as powerful as saying, oh my gosh, I did it and I didn't die. So it makes so much sense that when you're talking about that sort of concept of being killed and that finding that help that you need, because that is one of the things that perfectionism that's really so unfortunate about perfectionism is perfectionists tend to isolate because they don't want anybody to know that they don't have it handled. And they put on a front of a particular way of being in the world, and how they experience themselves is different, so that the people that they're relating to are relating to this front they put up as opposed to who they really are. And that creates a disconnect, and that doesn't feel good. And I can 100% relate to that. So it really is identifying it as an issue, and nothing is terrible or wonderful. There are certainly positive aspects to perfectionism. I'm not saying throw everything out. And the stuff that's not working, a lot of this stuff needs to be changed within relationship with another person, because that's where you start to get the feedback. And that's where you start to get, oh, I can say this and things are okay. I can do this and things are okay. And you start to relate with people and how you move through the world differently.
One of the things I had to notice was when I get defensive.
Oh, big one. Yes, Joan. Yes, big one.
Someone's trying to help me, right? And I'll go,
yes.
but. And I want you to know that I'm not stupid, you know, because my father's favorite things was calling people stupid. So that's so embedded in me. I just want to make sure you understand I'm not stupid. I'm so far away from stupid, you know. And the other thing that you just mentioned was about that feeling and I didn't die. The fact that you were bullied in your early life and you didn't die, that probably was something that helped you move beyond your perfectionism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I had never thought of that before.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing about my experiences with bullying was that I was bullied by people who were in my close friend circle. Mm-hmm. So I think that actually was a challenge for me, because these were people that I trusted and thought were on my side, and I was bullied by those people. So I think it actually was a bit of it made me into a very helpful person, because one of the ways I got out of the bullying was to basically reach out an olive branch during some sort of school assignment with somebody I was being bullied by. And they were so shocked by my olive branch that things kind of dissipated after that. So I think that made me into a very helpful person, because I realized that when I am helpful and in service, here we are.
But it also gave you a certain amount of faith in yourself.
That is true.
You know, yeah. and you know, your response to bullying was different from a lot of other people's experience, where they just run away from it and don't confront it. And yes. So that's something that was within you, because if you did that at a young age, you figured that out.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out. That's really, I had not really thought about that before. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in how people's life experience affects their business and financial outcomes.
Because boy, does it.
Yes. And, you know, the fact that you learned that you could take control of a situation, and no matter how bad it was, you weren't going to die and you could find a solution. And that's the key to making it a business. You're not going to die, and you're going to find a solution.
That if you were to wrap up business in one succinct thought, you're not going to die and you're going to figure out a solution. That's about it right there. 100%.
Because every time entrepreneurs understand that they don't understand, but that it's part of the process, income goes up and down.
Yep.
And so when income goes down, it's, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose everything. I'm not going to, and if you understand that you're not going to die and you're going to find a solution, you're in great shape.
Exactly. I think so much of entrepreneurship is just like you're saying, like you talk about that emotional intelligence and managing yourself. It's all about managing your emotions and managing maybe managing is not the word, but addressing and being aware of your reactions to things, your emotions to things, what comes up with you when you're producing something or when you're with a client or making a sale. It's all about how are you in these different processes that are 100% mostly, especially in the beginning, maybe foreign, maybe you've never done it before. There are so many things in entrepreneurship and business that you just are doing for the first time all the time. So there really is, you have to get on board with that 100%.
And one of the other things with emotional intelligence after self-awareness is self-management.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about, is to understand that the solution isn't outside of you. Mm-hmm. It's inside of you, and it's about your relationship with yourself and the world around you.
Yes.
And that takes a lot of time to teach people, because they're so involved with their shame and their fear and all the trauma that they come to the story with. And there's so much trauma that people have lived through, and it's hard to understand that bully isn't going to turn out to be lots of clients picking on you, which it can turn into.
Right. Yeah. So this is what I talk about in the process that I use, the fortitude and flow process. This is building fortitude. So this is noticing and discernment. And this is one of the foundational things that people learn, is that noticing piece, that awareness piece, and that discernment piece is starting to discern what is mine, what is somebody else's, starting to discern when I start to take certain actions or what I make certain things mean. It's that kind of shifting through all of these, right? These stories that come flying in, and these habits. So noticing and discernment are so huge to really dig into before even the action piece of it. It's like slowing everything down, and letting things. It's like when you shake up that sort of traditional analogy or practice. If you have maybe a glass of water with a bunch of sand in it, and you shake it up and everything is flying all around, and just letting things settle so you can kind of take a look at it and say, oh, okay, that's not what I thought it was at all. It's actually much simpler. It's much more basic, and I can work with that.
And one of the things I always had to remember was, what you think of me is none of my business.
I love that.
Which I learned at Codependence Anonymous, which I went to every day for 18 months till I figured out what it was and how I was acting it out. Because when you're codependent, you're doing everything because you're hoping that people will have a certain response to you.
Yes.
And that's something that just doesn't work.
100%. And it's one of those phrases that is so simple and so powerful, and is a practice.
Yes. I mean, what I like about these sayings that I've used over the many years of going from totally ineffective to effective is I have to keep telling my brain, when I had negative self-talk, I would say, thank you for sharing, but we don't talk that way anymore. So you have to interrupt the habit.
Yes.
And then say, what am I going to replace it with?
Yes. And I think one of the challenges that comes up with clients sometimes is this belief that if they don't do things this way, because this way has worked for a certain amount for so many years, that if I don't have the negative self-talk, then the automatic story that goes to is, well, I'm just going to lie on the couch all day long and stare at the ceiling and never do anything ever again. Right? They have this story that like, well, if I'm not driving myself hard, if I'm not mean to myself, if I don't have this mean voice in my head, then I'm going to stop producing. I'm going to stop making. I'm going to become this useless human being. So there is a certain amount of getting on board with being brave enough to replace that self-talk with something else, to try it out, to be experimental about it, right? A lot of the things I do are experiments. Hey, listen, we don't have to do this the rest of your life. We're going to try this out for a week. Let's try it out for a week and let's see how it goes. And if it doesn't work and you hate it, we'll do something else.
And to understand that your amygdala, that little thing in your brain, hates change.
Yes.
Because you don't know what the result is going to be. So as soon as you decide to do something differently, your amygdala says, be afraid of the tigers in the woods. And,
yes.
And once you comprehend how your brain is in charge, then you have to say, okay, my brain is in charge, but I can train my brain differently. And
yes.
it's like people think that they can't change their emotions. It's all about training your brain to have new responses to familiar stimuli, and you're not going to die.
Yes. Yes.
And
yes.
There are no tigers in the woods.
Totally. Totally. And I think the other piece of the process, which is something that I know you talk about also, is when you start paying attention to sensations and you start actually feeling things, they can be kind of big in the beginning because you haven't ever paid attention to them, and they can feel really overwhelming. Like I know that people sometimes will also have that reaction of, I don't know if I can handle it, right? I don't know if I can handle it. It feels so big. It feels so dangerous. It feels like it's going to overtake me, right? It feels like this separate entity that is like a monster, you know? And so there is so much, that's why I think it is so helpful to be working with somebody so that you can be in relationship with somebody and feel like somebody's got your back in this process, and that you're not just trying to tackle what feels like a monster, you know, by yourself on your own, and again, isolating and maybe having a not positive experience with it and then going back into these same cycles that don't work. So
yeah, it always helps to say what's in your head out loud, because that diffuses the energy of what's going around and around and around and around and keeping you up at night. And, you know,
yes,
just say it out loud. And
yep.
And there's something really powerful about that. And, you know, as you were talking, I realized I've had all this software problem with Intuit and a couple of other things that has kept me from writing the emails that I have to write to tell people about this event. And I'm coming towards the end of that, but I see how many things I'm creating, and we do take responsibility for creating whatever's going on, to keep me from being afraid of putting this thing out there. you know, and I noticed that making the sounds, my voice isn't as strong as it was because I haven't been doing this for 2 years. So I'm starting to do these exercises for voice training. And as we're talking, I'm seeing my own perfectionism come into this. It's such a difficult habit to break.
It really is. And I think, you know, I dealt with it just literally last night. There was this piece that I wanted to write, and it had a deadline on it. And I put it off, Joan, until literally like 3 hours before the deadline to write it. I mean, this was like classic. This was old school, procrastinate to the last minute and then put out a subpar product situation. And I think the thing that's changed, where I'm like, I think about it today, I'm like, okay, I see that. I see what I did. I noticed how I did that. I noticed how I handled that. And I really do feel like a shift has happened. And I'm aware of that now. And I'm interested in tackling that differently next time. I think the thing that also has changed is how I feel about myself, having a little bit more compassion for, as opposed to just going straight to the, well, nothing's changed, because that happens, right? Nothing's changed. I'm still doing the same thing over and over again and just really beating myself up about it. And now I see it and I'm like, oh, look at that. That habit's still around. Okay, good to know. Let's take some learnings from this and move on, and not, like you said, taking it personally, getting defensive about it. And it is something that I don't think will ever be, I don't think I'll ever be rid of it. It's not going to be eradicated from my system and magically I'm going to be totally perfectly imperfect, because that's the other thing, right? Perfectionists want to be a non-perfectionist perfectly. It's just perfectionism all the way down. So
no, I understand. I've been writing copy and doing webinars and things for as long as webinars were in existence. And it's that putting it off. I remember my brother, who wrote a lot of scripts for big TV shows, and he always did overnighters. Last minute getting, because there's always a deadline if it's a weekly show. And I love what you've done. You've just brought into the light so much of stuff that's in the darkness within ourselves. And once you see you're not the only one who's doing this, and it's not going to kill you, and that it's dangerous, your brain is going to tell you it's dangerous to change, and to say to your brain, thanks for trying to protect me, but that doesn't work anymore.
Yes.
It sounds a little schizoid, but you have to talk to yourself this way. Otherwise, those old habits that you learned from your mother or learned from your father are going to get in your way. Well, I love what you're doing. Tell people how they can find out more about you and the fortitude and flow process that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to fortitudeandflow.com, and you'll see right on the homepage, there's an option to learn more. And what I actually have put together, because I've done a ton of interviews, I've interviewed over 60 perfectionists talking about their stories with perfectionism and their particular flavors, is I've put together a guide of archetypes. So there are 5 archetypes that I've discovered that are really typical of perfectionists. And it can help to, if you can figure out what your archetype is, it gives you a starting point on where on the fortitude and flow process you can put your energy to start off with and really create some change. So that's what people should do. Head to the website, get that guide, and get started on understanding their flavor of perfectionism a little bit more.
Wow. I am so glad that we were introduced. There are times when I wish I could be your age in today's world, because so many people are a whole lot smarter than people my age who have become kind of lost in getting old and how many doctors they go to see. And your world is, from my point of view, seems so rich that if you don't compare yourself to other people, because there are so many bright, creative people wandering around now, and you don't think, oh my God, I can't do that. But there's so much richness among your generation that it's hard to not see the potential, even though we have to deal with climate change and all the crap that's going on among the grown-ups who are screwing up the world. And just, your generation is going to find a way to function and to help change things. I mean, that's why we have so much chaos now, because the old guard is being so threatened.
Well, I think, Joan, a lot of credit goes to people like you for paving the way, because it's just like that concept of, when people, what was it, the 4-minute mile, whatever the minute,
the
right?
4-minute mile, yes.
4-minute, right?
Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile.
So, right, there was that concept of you could never break the 4-minute mile. And once somebody did it, all of a sudden, there was this big shift. So I really credit people like you, who you've been ahead of your time your entire life.
Yes.
And you've been paving the way for the generations behind you your entire life. And I think without somebody like you, who's been blazing that path and who's been thinking differently and who's been outside of the box and really just on the leading edge of something that people didn't have language for until years after you discovered it, basically. I think that you've been made it possible for people like me to do the work that I do. So I'm grateful for that. And I don't think things like that are possible without you.
Well, thank you. I've come to see that I'm a way shower and I have to live with the consequences. Uh, I'll never forget when I saw the movie, when it first came out, Yellow Submarine with the Beatles. And I knew then that there was hope for me because it was so unique and so outside of the box. And, I still talk about the Blue Meanies. Not everybody knows what I'm talking about, but that was a section of Yellow Submarine where these Blue Meanies were there. And that to me is the stuff within us. To me, it's like when you have surgery and they open up your body, that lets out the Blue Meanies. But unfortunately, that's a cultural a thing that not everybody understands. But so keep your eyes open for change and realize that it's to your advantage to get on the change bandwagon and not to stay stuck where you are.
100%.
I want to thank you for being. This was such a wonderful conversation, and wow. When you meet someone who you really relate to on the way that we have begun to relate, it feels so good. And it enhances my life. This is not just an interview. I'll go through the rest of the day feeling wow. So thank you for being who you are and for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Joan. I'm gonna have a wow day after this as well. So I'm totally so grateful for this conversation, for everything that you're putting out there.
All right. And whatever we talked about, the show notes will be on prosperityplace.com.
Love it.
That interview really hit some buttons for me. And as I processed it after I had originally talked to her, it really made a difference for me. And I hope that you'll understand your perfectionism. So many people have it. We're just trying to prove our worth to people, and we want them to like us, and we don't always get it right. So I hope you'll really take to heart what Audrey talked about today. And I really appreciate your being here. That's it for today. I hope if you enjoy this podcast that you'll share it with someone else. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye now.